All right, so we are live again. Woo! For our final panel, Freelancing 101, Writing and Illustrating for Tabletop RPGs. And that illustrating also should have a parentheses of map making as well, because we have a map maker here. All right, so if you guys could introduce yourselves, that'd be excellent. We have James Introcaso, Marcel Mercado, Marc Radle, and Anna Meyer here. So if you guys, James, could you go first? You introduce yourself, tell people who you are, what you do.
Yeah, my name is James Introcaso. I'm a freelance game designer. I've done work with Kobold Press, Wizards of the Coast, Roll20, Critical Role, and a bunch of other publishers, including self-publishing some stuff. And I am super excited to talk today. I run a blog called worldbuilderblog.com and a podcast called Tabletop Babble, where I talk to a lot of freelancers as well.
Awesome. Marcel.
Hi, my name is Marcel Mercado. I'm a freelance illustrator. I've been doing this for 9 years now. I mostly work in video games and tabletop gaming industry. I've done work for Borderlands, Kobold Press, as well as some stuff for Dungeons and Dragons. And yeah, that's me.
All right, and Marc.
Hey everyone, I'm Marc Radle. I'm the art director and chief layout person, graphic design person for Kobold Press. Kind of an artist too, although I haven't actually done much illustration in many years because I'm too busy with all this Kobold Press stuff. And an occasional writer. I every once in a while get to find some time to do some writing design for Kobold Press, but mainly art director and graphics person. And most importantly, as you can see, I don't have a camera.
And Anna.
Hi, I'm Anna Meyer, and I'm a professional fantasy cartographer. Been so for about 10 years now, and I worked for, I've done for maps for about a dozen publishers, and also run my own Patreon when I do my hobby stuff of doing Greyhawk maps and others for my patrons. So, but Kobold Press has been the biggest that I've done most of my commission work for. Yep.
Awesome.
Last like 6 years almost, I think. Yep.
Heck yeah, Anna's great.
Yeah.
And I am Meagan Maricle. I am one of the editors for Kobold Press. All right, so let's get into freelancing questions. And for those that are watching at home, that sounds weird to say. Anyway, for those that are watching, please feel free to type any questions into chat, and we will do our best to keep up with all of them and answer your questions as they come up. So I guess one of the first things is what are some of the... Okay, so freelancing, when you're first thinking about going into freelancing, because some people, if they want to do freelancing, they're going to have to, quit their day jobs or have it in addition to their day jobs. So what are some of your suggestions for making that transition and for when to make that decision? So who wants to start?
I can start. I actually, prior to me doing freelance, I had a studio job. And I was working in the video game industry for about 7 years. And honestly, one of the best things that you can do is start off at a studio, because you can just dedicate that time to building your craft, and little by little, get to know the owners, get to know some of the managers, and kind of start to slowly learn all these other things about running a business before you dive right into it. And in my case, like it helped me out a lot, because by the time I did go freelance,
week while I was working another full-time job to do it, right? I said, okay, it takes me 2 to 4 hours to write a blog post. I'm going to make sure that I schedule this every week in addition to that. And then I would also be able to hold myself accountable, right? When you have a blog, the best way to build traffic is to update it regularly. And so it was a way that I held myself accountable for putting out writing every single week, because if I didn't, I was going to lose traction and steam. So I would say get started with something that you totally control if you're not already in a great job that lets you do the thing you also want to do, and then you can use that to build jobs slowly up until you feel financially secure enough to make the leap.
Anna?
For me, it was kind of, I did it back when I moved to California from Sweden like a bit over 9 years ago. So I had a career back then, and it was just my hobby. I never thought it would be more than my hobby, really, to be honest. And then when I moved to California, I realized I have nothing to do. I need to do something. So then I had my big Greyhawk map project that has been my fan project. So I realized I'm going to sit down and just take 3 years and just do that full time and see where it leads. And after those 3 years, then I've done Southlands and a bunch of other stuff started coming in. So I was lucky. It was basically life gave me an opportunity to take the leap over without too much fuss. There was no other option. So I just like, okay, I'm doing this. And it was the downturn. There was no jobs in California. It was like the housing crisis and everybody losing their jobs and stuff like that. So I realized I need to do this. So I just kept doing it and was in the lucky situation. I had the money and the financial situation that I could do it. So it was a lot of lucky circumstances, so to speak.
Awesome. And Mark, did you have any comments on that?
No. I mean, I started off freelancing, doing illustrating and writing things as well, but I never took the leap into full time. I always worked a full time job and then did that on the side. So I never had the courage to do what all of you folks have done.
Well, it doesn't necessarily take courage. A lot of it is financial stability and things like that, and knowing that there will be more to do. And the other part of it, too, none of you brought it up, but it is one thing I guess freelancers should be aware of, is that every state and or country has their own rules and laws related to being a freelancer. Some of them make you treat yourself as your own separate business. You have to create the whole separate entity. And then others are like, whatever, you can do whatever. So always make sure to keep an eye on that as well. So that could be a factor in deciding if you're going to do it or not.
Yeah. And if you're in America, one thing that I hear a lot of people say is have a spouse with good health insurance and a secure full-time job.
Exactly. That's
So that's a big thing. And Mark, I freelance, but I also freelance in other industries to supplement my income as well. So I write and produce television commercials as well. So I have not fully entered the RPG world like 100%. I'm freelancing in other places as well.
Gotcha.
Awesome. Yes, diversify is a great idea as well.
Yep.
So one of the big things about freelancing is that we all have to do what other people tell us, right? Like James said earlier that he originally wrote for himself, but eventually you have to write or draw or whatever for other people. So in the industry, we call that writing or illustrating to spec, right? Mm-hmm. So then what are some common challenges that you guys face, either on a daily basis or when you were first transitioning into freelancing? What are some of the common challenges for writing to spec? Or with writing to spec? James, you can go first.
So as far as I think a big thing for writers is learning the styles of all of the different companies that you work for, right? So like Wizards of the Coast has a very specific style, and they actually have a style guide that goes with this is how you write an official D&D product. And so learning that is really helpful, but then you turn around and write with someone else. So like I also work with MCDM, which is Matt Colville's company. That is a totally different style. They're both writing stuff for 5th edition. It is more conversational. It is definitely freer. Feels more free to use like similes and metaphors and exaggerations. He doesn't. A part of his style guide is you don't always have to write a complete sentence, and so like learning how to the differences in all of those things. And both companies write differently than I would myself, right? So I think learning the voice and the styles of the different companies you're in is like a big thing when you're writing to spec. And then the other big thing about writing to spec is like really writing what you are asked to write. And if you have a cool idea that isn't covered in the script, isn't covered in what you are given, the outline or the specifications that you are given, or you want to change something, communication is really key. So like, I think it's totally fine to ask for those things, but I would read it over, ask for all of the changes that you think you want to make, and then listen to the person who is paying you, because at the end of the day, they are your boss and you're writing something for them. So don't go rogue, because what's going to happen is you just will make people sad, and then editors are going to end up trying to adjust your thing and make it work, and you'll make Meagan sad, which is not a thing.
Your writing's excellent, James.
On the art side, and I'm sure Marcel can speak more to it, we have we basically work on what we call art briefs. I'll send a given artist, after they've been contracted to do a certain number of pieces, say 10 pieces. I'll send, well, again, what we call briefs, which are usually can be very short. Sometimes they're more involved. Basically, just saying, a wizard. It could be as simple as a wizard casting a cool spell. Go crazy. Could be incredibly elaborate. A wizard wearing red robes with gold trim, carries a staff with a diamond, incredibly detailed. And what I look for is for that artist to, if it is really, really short, I'm trusting them. Hey, just do something cool. If it's really elaborate, it's because there's a need in the adventure or whatever for that much detail. And then in that case, I'm really looking for that artist, and I'm trusting that artist will deliver that. The last thing I want is that detailed of a brief, and then I get something that looks awesome, but it's nowhere what I asked for, because then I have to go back and say, well, okay, here's a problem. It didn't match the brief, so you got to redo it. But I kind of look at that as, no matter how elaborate or sparse the brief is, I try and see that as a collaboration with the artist. Hey man, or I say man, generic man, hey, here's what I'm looking for. Beyond that, make it look cool. If you have a different idea, let me know, and maybe it'll work. And that, I really enjoy working that way.
Definitely. And then Anna.
Well, yeah, when I hear this, that you have a formal brief and stuff like that, it doesn't seem to work that way in cartography, because cartography seems to be both specialized and very broad, meaning it's specialized because it's a lot of techie graphical stuff, but it also involves so much, meaning it involves a whole book and stuff. So it's kind of hard to narrow it down to a single page, meaning you have to read through 300-400 pages. So the biggest challenge for me is to get the right information. Either you don't get what you need, or you get 10 kitchen sinks. It seems to either fall in one or the two categories. I asked, okay, what kind of thing is this? And they say, I don't even know what I asked for weird things like climates and stuff like that. What kind of trees are there? And there's no one say, I have no clue. We haven't thought about that. And then you can say, you can read this. And then they send the PDFs for 10 novels, but 1,200 pages. And I have to start sifting through, or 600 or 300 or something. So that's the biggest challenge for me, at least until you got halfway through the project, is to get the right information when you need it. That's by far the hardest part. Now, when I worked with this 4 or 5 projects for Kobold Press with Brian and Ben and Mark and others and Wolfgang and so on, now they starting to understand what kind of information I need, and we can kind of go back and forth. But there's still issues. We have to go back and redo things. It was halfway through a project, I even tore up the Southlands. There was a 9-10 months project. 4 months into it, I tore out the whole thing, started from scratch again, because I realized it's not good enough. So through the latest one, we kind of and I redid 1/3 of it, because that was not what we have intended. So we can kind of go sidetracked sometimes, but that's something you have to accept. You can't sit and as an artist saying that, I did this, so now it's holy, I love it. So you have to tear out things and redo it. That you can't have prestige that way. You just have to, like James said, it's you're working for someone else. It's what they want. That is the law, so to speak, in those projects. Then you need to do your own stuff, so you can kind of get an outlet for your own creativity.
All right, and Marcel.
Yeah, like James mentioned, it's really going to be client dependent a lot of times, only because there are certain clients who, especially some of the larger clients, and especially if it's a licensed product, they'll have a lot of work prepared beforehand. So I've done work for companies where it's just not fun, because it's here's this big ass 200-page booklet, and it has pretty much everything in there, and it's so what am I really contributing to this, you know, and it's just, and so the kind of work that gets to be done is, I guess, a more literal translation. But then there are companies like what Mark mentioned, you know, where he's like, just cool wizard. And it's like, okay, awesome. But sometimes, you know, you still, even when you do get some of the, you know, a brief like that, you still want to kind of ask questions, just because you're working on a product that other people are also working on. And so there might be certain details that you can use, and, you know, certain backstory elements that could be introduced in the design as well, that just, you know, adds more to it, and it doesn't come off too generic. So it's always, you know, worth always asking, hey, you know, is there a little bit more backstory to this? What is this tied to? And like Mark said, it's a collaboration, and as long as you have that good communication with the client, you should be fine. Don't assume anything. Just ask.
And cartography is also so specialized that there is a lot of, they hire me often because cartography is so specialized that they need someone, so they don't understand what they really need. So often you have to kind of make up, and you have to give them an example, then they can criticize it. That's often the case, so to speak. They ask for, they don't know what to ask for, but when they see it, they know if they like it or not. So so that's why you sketch up something. Doesn't really matter what it looks like, just to get the discussion going, so to speak. That's really key to get it, and then accept that it is a back and forth. And also now, when I worked for some years, now we know each other, so they know what I can do, and I know what Kobold Press wants more for their project. So there's a lot more trust in the relationship that way, so that I have a lot more leeway, but it's still that back and forth, so to speak. So yeah.
Yeah, and I think all of you've kind of touched on it too. One of the big things with freelancing is make sure that you communicate, right? Like, keep the communication lines must remain open. All right, so let's look at, well, I guess like social media type things, right? Or just in general, like getting your name out to different publishers and stuff, making friends with those in the industry, or making good impressions of people in the industry. What are ways that people can do that? What are the advantages of it, and all of that? So, James, you want to start us off?
Yeah, so we were actually talking about this just before the stream started, which was, you know, about like getting on social media and talking about your stuff. So for me personally, and I know it's a different story kind of for everybody else here, which I think the first thing is, it's always different. Everybody's path is different. The amount of time it takes everybody is different to do these things, and that's okay. And so I sort of, when I started writing stuff, I also was podcasting, and I continue to podcast, and they both cross promote each other, right? And in everything that I write on my blog, I'm like, hey, I'm a podcaster, go check out here. And then every time I podcast, hey, I'm a writer, go check out my stuff over here. But then also being on social media and throwing your stuff out there, having the chutzpah and the guts to like share your stuff is kind of important, because it's a way a lot of people see your stuff, right? It's the way that you can share and start to build an audience. And the internet is, everybody on the internet, particularly fans of a thing, have opinions about stuff. And so, you need to be ready, certainly, to deal with feedback, sometimes whether you ask for it or not. And sometimes you ask, right? As a game designer, I often throw things out on my blog and say, let me know what you think. And I am grateful for the comments and people who take the time to leave them. And sometimes you don't want to know what people think, but they let you know anyway. And it's sort of handling yourself online, certainly with grace. And that's not to say that if somebody's mean to you or a jerk, you could, certainly call them out on that, right? All that kind of stuff. But being online and then being a good member of the community, right? And also doing that with other people, trading ideas, telling somebody when you appreciate the thing that they are saying, the message they're throwing out there, or the cool piece of art that they took the time to draw and share, right? That's sort of how you can engage and build followers, is just by like going online, being a good person, conducting yourself as you would in public at a meeting, and telling people when you like their stuff, like giving a lot more, as well as asking for feedback and things like that, is a great way to build a following. And then, I was saying that for me personally, a lot of the business opportunities that I've gotten in the RPG industry have come to me through Twitter specifically. I've shared an idea or something on my blog. Somebody saw it on Twitter. Somebody DM'd me on Twitter to get something. So that's the big thing for me, is Twitter has been huge in helping grow my career, as well as going to conventions, which I'm sure somebody else will probably touch on.
I guess conventions are great. That's actually how I met Wolfgang. But
yeah.
Marcel.
Yeah, for me, like I have a social media presence, but I really don't keep much on top of it, just because a lot of the commercial work that I do is under NDA, and so when you work especially in video games, I'm brought in really early in the project, and a video game can take anywhere from 3 to 5 years to make. So usually that work is tied up for all that time, and by the time it does come out, I'm like, nah, that's not indicative of where I'm at right now. It doesn't look that great. And oftentimes too, I do a lot of work during the blue sky phase, which is essentially, when they have an idea for a game, but it's not the actual game. So there's a lot of spitballing, there's a lot of things up in the air, and oftentimes what happens is that the final product looks very different. So it's work that I'm like, well, that's fine. I can't show it. So I try to, at the very least, still do some work on my own that I can show and I can keep up and whatnot. But yeah, most of my work honestly comes in through emails and referrals. I have a pretty good client list, and it's just a matter of oftentimes it's just sending an email and being, hey, how's it going, and touching back on them, and then all of a sudden they're like, oh my god, I've got this project and you'd be perfect for it. And it's like, if I hadn't done that, I probably wouldn't gotten it. The other thing that I've done a lot is conventions, and I highly recommend it. Last year I did I've done IlluxCon, which is up in Pennsylvania, which is more Illustrator, but it's great for book publishing clients. You meet with a lot of art directors and stuff like that, so it's great. But then I did the other big one in Indiana. That's for gaming, and you have pretty much every company there. And that one, I met with, I want to say, about 80 companies, and I got 11 contacts out of that. And out of that, I still got about 3 jobs. But one of those jobs was huge, and again, through working through them, I ended up getting referral to other clients. So it was great.
Awesome. Anna, what about you?
Well, it's kind of interesting. Cartography is such a niche of a niche, but I have some similar experience where I've done some projects for the computer game industry too. And the good thing is they pay well. The bad thing is that you're completely under NDA, and it's the code word. I had no clue what game I was working on, so to speak. I knew the studio, but and often it's a studio that delivers content to the game studio. So I don't even know who the end client is, and I deliver something and I have no clue if it ended up in whatever project. So I'm saying, oh, what you worked on? I have no idea. So I don't. That's something I just do for money occasionally, and that's it, so to speak. I have no clue. But it's kind of weird, and they tweak it beyond anything I can tell right away. So, and it's usually 3D geometry and terrain. So that it's huge. If you want to work in that sector, you can. If you're willing to move around the world, there's plenty of jobs in my line of work for it. So they're screaming for people that can do virtual terrain for a lot of big computer games out there. It's crazy. So if you know this stuff, so to speak, and you can do it, there's plenty of jobs. And that seems to go with the niche of doing large setting maps and stuff. That seems to be not enough cartographers, because I get usually someone asking me email at least twice a month, sometimes even once a week. And I say no to most of them. And the problem is that the publishers don't seem to understand what they're asking for. They think that cartography, doing a world map, is like doing an illustration on a book page. But the problem is that doing a wizard or something doesn't always require you to read 600 pages and go back and forth. So in order to detail it, you need an enormous amount of time. And so a lot of publishers come to me and say, oh, can you deliver that in 3-4 weeks? That seems, or 6 weeks seems to be kind of the average standard. And I simply say, no, I can't do that in 9 months, a year. So I'm telling publishers, if you're interested in me, reach out at least 2 years ahead. And then we can start planning it 1 year ahead, and then I have 1 year to deliver. That's usually the time frame I'm working with. And thankfully, Kobold Press seems to accept me being so slow and meticulous, so to speak, and others are too. So, but it's a long process. So if you want to get into this, there are more work, but it's a hell of a lot of work to get into. But once you do, you don't have to go out and beg for work. That's the good thing. Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, and in my case, it was kind of funny. I'm not a social media guy. I mean, I am just enough, just barely, just enough, as much as I have to be. But, for me, even when I first started in the industry, it was still communication, and ironically, it was still conventions. My first contact with Wolfgang actually was as a game writer designer. There was Kobold Quarterly magazine, and Pathfinder. The game was just coming out. It had just come out. And I just pitched a class to Wolfgang. I didn't know him, never met him. Just said, hey, I want to do a Spellless Ranger class. And, did a pitch. He liked it. It ran in a magazine. It was popular. And then I did a number of additional writing things. So for, the first few years, Wolfgang only knew me as a game writer. And then I started doing some illustrations for him. And then I was he invited me to come out to PaizoCon. And we were sitting at a dinner with other freelancers, and I just happened to be sitting next to him, and he just in passing was lamenting. I don't know if he maybe checked his phone, he was checking his email, but he was lamenting that he worked with a number of different freelance graphic designers. And, I think it was one of those, I'm working on this one book and it fell through. Oh man, now I got to find a graphic designer quick. And I sort of just said, my full-time job, I'm a graphic designer if you need some help. And it's funny, to this day, my favorite comment was he looked at me and made me feel good. He looked at me and said, so you write and you draw and you're a graphic designer? You're like the triple threat. And to this day, that was like the greatest thing anyone ever said. Okay. So then I just started doing random graphic design for him, and then over time, it just got more and more, and then to the point where he, said, how'd you like to just come on full-time in essence? Not full-time, but so even then, it's really about knowing people, meeting, getting your name out. And then as the art director for Kobold Press, it really is the same thing, talk about trust and learning to work with people. I have what I like to say, a stable of artists that are really my go-tos, Marcel, certainly, Brian and the previous people that I know the work is good. I know we work well together. I know they're going to deliver. And that's incredibly important. And then, as Marcel was saying, he doesn't have to come and beg me for work. Whenever a new assignment comes out, one of my first things is, okay, I have this many artists that I know I'm going to give work to. Okay, how many am I giving to Marcel? It's that kind of thing. And it's just that relationship you build up.
And so as the art director, Marc, how do you look for new talent? So, because that's, if there is a freelance artist out there or someone who's considering going into freelancing, what kind of things would they need to do to get the attention of art directors like you?
Well, that's a good question. In Kobold Press's case, and I know it's the same for most publishers, they're going to have submission guidelines right on the website for writing and for art and for cartography. So cartographers and artists, their stuff is going to come to me first. And you just submit. Usually the best thing to do is a short email, little introductory email. Hey, my name is so-and-so. I've done this. I've worked for this many companies. I'd really like to work with you guys. And then in our case, what I'll do then is I'll respond. If I like what I see, I'll respond back. We start talking some basic rates because that's, you want to talk about the creative aspect, but first and foremost, it's a business. So the next thing I do is, okay, how much do you generally charge for, and then I break things down, you know, single figure, half page illustration, full page cover. And then if the rates they come back with are, you know, in line, then I keep them in mind. And then when the new project comes up, I'll send a couple pieces their way. Usually at first it'll just be a few pieces. And if they come back great and you know, the working relationship was great, then, you know, they're going to get more work. And, you know, so Marcel started off, sent me an email, you know, many, many years ago, and she said, hey, you know, and we were just getting started on the Pathfinder version of Deep Magic, and we needed a cover, and I really liked his stuff, so we took a shot, and he delivered, which I think is just a fantastic cover. I mean, I liked it so much that, geez, you know, years later, when we just finished the 5e Deep Magic, Wolfgang and I talked, and, you know, and Wolfgang, it was funny, Wolfgang said, all right, who do you want to get to do the new cover? I said, you know, in any other situation, I would say, yeah, of course, it's a new version. It's the 5e. We got to get a new cover, but I love that cover. We got to just use it again. I mean, we have to. And he's like, yeah, all right, let's do it. But I mean, you know, Marcel just shot me an email one day and said, hey, are you looking for work?
Yeah.
That's awesome. That's great. Yeah, so let's touch briefly on that, the whole pitch process. So I know for writing, generally you're going to reach out to the designer and be like, or not the designer, the publisher, and be like, hey, I want to write this particular thing for you, right? Usually it's important for most writers, don't send an entirely done work, right? Publishers they don't want your entirely written adventure or monster or whatever. You can send them, the pitch is going to be more of a short line of, this is what I kind of want to do. So James and Marcel, do you guys want to discuss the pitch process? Maybe tell a little bit about it, like what you would do when you're formulating a pitch. And then Marc, you can kind of follow up with how it kind of comes to you. And I guess I can speak a little bit on how it comes to the publisher. But yeah, James and Marcel.
Yeah. So when you're doing a pitch for something that you would like to write, in general, I think what you just said, Meagan, is true, right? One, never send, this is the article I would like to write, and it is attached, because they're not going to read it. And legally, it's better for them to not even like open that and check it out, right? To say, I have no knowledge of this, because then if we publish something similar, but it's by a different author, you can't sue us and yada, yada, right? All that kind of stuff. So I do think something that really helps is when you're writing a pitch, keeping in mind, like, how can I get the idea across as quickly as possible? We always talk about in other industries, when you have an idea, like, what's your elevator pitch for yada, yada, right? And that means when you're riding on an elevator from the first floor to the 10th floor with George Lucas, can you pitch him your idea for a Star Wars movie? Or I guess now Kathleen Kennedy, right? But can you pitch your idea that quickly? And so I try to keep that in mind too when I am sending an idea for an article or an adventure or anything that I want to publish with another publisher, to keep it sort of short. I don't need to tell them the entire idea. What I need to do is sort of set it up for them, let them know why I think it's unique, and also why you think it's right for that publisher, right? Showing that, you know, hey, this is the kind of thing you do, and I would work well with you on this because your brand is this. You know, Kobold Press loves dark fantasy, right? That's what the Warlock Patreon is all about. A little bit of research will tell you, like, okay, so it's not just fantasy. How can I work dark fantasy into my pitch for Kobold Press? Write that up. You know, we're talking maybe a paragraph or two at most, and then send it on and keep it short, keep it pithy. I come from a marketing writing background, you know, writing TV commercials where you have to fit stuff into 30 seconds. And that has really helped me. So thinking about that, like, read it out loud. How long does it take you to read? All that kind of stuff. If you're taking a minute or less of somebody's time, that's usually very good for a pitch.
Yeah. For an artist, it's a little bit easier. You just, you know, your email has to be professional and concise, but also be very clear about what is it that you want to do for them. Because oftentimes, you know, you want to make sure that the art that you're going to have attached to the email, right, matches to what you're asking. And oftentimes it's just 3 images on an image on the email attached, and then a link to your website that has more images, because the idea is that at least those 3 images would be enough that if they like it, then they can go check more and then go from there. But it's really that simple. You don't want to put too many images in your email, because then they'll have a much bigger number of images where they can look and go, well, this one doesn't look as good as these other ones and whatnot. So 3 is actually the best thing you can do. And if they want to see more, they can just go to the portfolio.
Right. And then Anna, I know you were talking earlier about most of the time with cartography, they reach out to you, but are there times you've had to do pitches, and how do you formulate those?
Well, I think for someone now, I was lucky enough that I did my own hobby project so long, and it had a fan base that was big enough, and also that there are not that many cartographers that, if you do Dungeon maps, there are probably hundreds of people that do fantastic Dungeon maps. But when it comes to setting maps, there are not that many of us that specializes in my niche. In that way, I'm lucky. But when it comes to that, I think it's important to be good at what you're doing. Cartography has everything from very technical maps like dice and logos, and others that have a very technical style. And then you have others who are very painterly and so on. So find your niche and your style, and then are ready to divert from it as needed, so to speak. But find a style, and then also have, because a lot of cartography graphics are huge. You can't send it in the email and do it justice. So you have to put it somewhere. So have your website, put your stuff there, and create one hobby project I do for promotion. That meaning my Greyhawk work is basically, it's my fun, but it's my way of promoting myself. That's the way to show. And it's also good because that I can create the maps I think publishers would like to have, and because publishers always, they don't go around thinking much about cartography. That's one of these side things they want to hire an expert to do. But if they see it, I like that. That's a cool function. I want that on our maps. And that's why Wolfgang reached out to me. He kind of saw that was a cool idea. Can we do that for Midgard? And he asked me, and then I did a little version of it and sent it. This is what we can do. And I looked at the earlier maps and that was I think one of the key things. I looked at the earlier maps that were done for Kobold Press, and I kept some of those elements so the people that play in Midgard and the Kobold products should feel at home, even if there was a new cartographer on the watch doing the new maps, so to speak. So continuity and keep the continuity between old products and new is important that way too.
Awesome. Yeah, and each of you has kind of touched on that, like the matching with the publisher's style, right? So if you're an artist that likes doing a lot of whimsy and stuff, you don't really want to reach out to the people that are doing Call of Cthulhu art, right?
Yeah, that's very true. And it's true in pretty much every industry, especially because there's a lot of artists out there. There's a lot of people out there that want to be artists, and they're sending their work. So companies have their pick. You know, they can be very picky about it. And so if your art matches what that company is doing, then, you know, they don't have to wonder whether you can do the work that they want you to do or not. And so, yeah, you have to be very, very specific in that regard.
Awesome. All right. So I'd like to talk now. So we're still in the practicality of being a freelancer, but we are getting close to the end of our time slot, right? Right? Yeah, we're getting kind of close. Okay, so let's go into what about the importance of things like time management and when to accept and decline work?
Yeah.
Wow.
Because it is okay to say no. I think a lot of freelancers don't realize that.
Yeah. I think if you get to a point where you are extremely overwhelmed with work because you want to say yes to everything, it is probably time for you to up your prices. Because I think the best way to, like for me, right? That's when I was like, oh, I think I can charge more per word now because there are so many people knocking at my door, and I would like to work less, but still make as much money. And so that is, gets back to your very first question, Meagan, about like, when do you know you can make the leap to full time and all that kind of stuff. So if you're getting a lot of work like that, one thing I recommend doing is saying to the people you work with, hey, just so you know, as of X date, right? Giving them a heads up. Don't change it midstream on the project you're on or anything like that. But like, next time we work together, I would like to make a little more money or whatever, and see what the reaction is, and kind of going from there is always a good way to go. It's definitely okay to say no to work. And I think, again, it for everybody's different. You know, Anna, like she said, needs 2 years out to book her, and she's very upfront about that. And so if you want to work with Anna, and you do, you should start planning now, right, to do that for a project that is at least 2 years down the road. For writing stuff and planning the schedule, I think about how many words can I conceivably write in a day, right? And also keeping in mind that when you're a freelancer, you also should read over and revise your work on your own before you send it, right, to a publisher, and that you'll probably have meetings and phone calls, and you'll have to write your own pitches and all that kind of stuff. So every day is different. So like, I look at it as like, then, okay, so with all that stuff in mind, about how many can I get done in a week? And then keeping track of my projects that way. And when I get over a certain limit, I have to ask myself, am I going to be willing to work at night, to work on the weekends? What other commitments do I have coming up, and that sort of thing? And it takes time because, at least in the case of writing, I have gotten faster than I was at the beginning of stuff. And I also know that when I take on a new client, right, if I'm working in a new role-playing game system that I've never worked in before, if I am working with a client who has a different style and voice, it's going to take me a little longer to get started with them, because I'll need to do research and get started up. So planning all of those things and thinking about all those things, I think, is important. And I also, because I am a big Twitter person, and I like to chat and stuff like that, I turn off the internet when I write sometimes, so that I cannot physically, like, it's such a reaction for me if I take a moment to sit back and think to go to the Twitter window, that I literally will turn off the Wi-Fi on my computer or whatever, so that I can't, like, if I open Chrome, it's just a dead page. I'm like, all right, I'm not supposed to do this right now, let me get back to writing.
Yeah, and as an art director, I actually respect and appreciate when an artist or a cartographer says, no, I'm sorry, I can't do that in the time frame you need, because I'd rather know that than have the artist or the cartographer say, yeah, sounds great, and then a week before the due date say, hey, you know what, I'm behind, I'm going to need another 3 weeks. Because you know what, I think, and I touched on it earlier, this is still a business, and that due date isn't a date that we just sort of made up out of whole cloth. I mean, it's based on press dates, and it's based on a lot of things. So one of the things I'm looking for you, if you say, yes, I can do this, is that you can hit that date. So if someone says, hey, I really would love to do this, but based on my workload, I can't, I appreciate that. I respect that. I'd rather you say that again than say absolutely and then blow your due date. That's a real good way for me to put a little mental check next to your name to not work with you anymore.
Awesome. All right. Let's see. So, anybody want to talk about recognizing constructive criticism and handling rejection?
Get used to rejection. It's a given. I mean, that it's crazy. I guess for me, in a year, there's more work that I don't do than what I actually end up doing. And that's fine. That's not a problem. Even if I could do all that work, I would not have the time of the day. And like we talked previously, sometimes you have to say no, and sometimes, it works the other way. But rejection is something that you have to get used to it. It's not personal. Oftentimes it's just things that don't have to do anything with you, really. So yeah, get used to rejection. It's not a big deal.
Yeah, and the constructive criticism is another thing I would say is, for artists and cartographers, if you send me a sketch, you're working to it, and I say, hey, I really like it, but here are a couple things that I don't like and I need you to change. I'm not telling you I hate you. I'm just saying,
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. I'm just saying, hey, for this reason, I need you to change this.
Mm-hmm.
I don't mind if you come back to me and say, oh, wow, well, could we maybe do this? That's collaboration. But at the end of the day, if I'm asking you to change something, you need to just do it. Again, it's a business.
Yeah.
I've had artists that really, I can tell, are taking it very personally, and and I may sound like a hard ass, but at the end of the day, I'm not here to hold your hand and stroke your ego. I just need you to do an awesome piece that fits what we need. And if you can do that, you will absolutely get more work. If it's a struggle just to get you to make the changes, well, then it's not worth working, in the future. And I'm just gonna, you're not going to get more work. It's just the reality.
And I also think that to have my Greyhawk map project that I've done for many, many years taught me to deal with people telling me you should do this differently and whatever. And it's a quality control, meaning I would never be half as good if it weren't for people scrutinizing what I'm doing, telling me what could be better, what works for them, etc. And so I see it as quality control and advancement. I wouldn't be able to do any of what I'm doing without other people telling me what to do, because the people that use what you do, and especially maps that are part art and inspiration and part useful tools, so to speak, like a rule system is part of it. So then it's the end users and the publishers, and also the publishers, they know their customers and their fans and their players much better than I do as coming in as a freelancer. So I have to respect that. What I can bring into it are some of the kind of cartography detail. I can tell them, if you want to do it that way, that means we have to push it another month. It will take me a month to do that. So you have to kind of communicate that early. That's the point. Early. Have that discussion early. Don't come halfway through saying that, oh, the things you're telling me now, well, yeah, that was great. So you have to be aware of what technical limitations and will put on it. So Mark and me, we've had that discussion several times when we had one famous example, then came up and said, oh, we need more volcanoes. It was like volcano week, and we needed lots of volcanoes on the map. And I simply said, okay, that will take me 3-4 weeks, and we have to go back and edit it. Is it worth it? And Wolf can say, yes, it's worth it, because we need more volcanoes. Okay,
but I need it in a week, Scotty.
Yeah. So we had to kind of go back and forth and fix it. But it was a volcano period, and we did volcanoes on the map, and that added a month or 3 weeks or whatever it ended up being. But I think it was worth it. So yeah. But it's important to have that dialogue. So when you have something like that, you have to talk about it and do it, and you kind of work around. And sometimes it's not. Then things have to go. There are errors in there that happen because lack of communication. I didn't understand what to ask for, and no one thought telling me, and that ended up, and that's it, so to speak. So yeah,
absolutely.
Awesome. All right. We touched on the pitch process, and I didn't go back to it. I totally apologize, because there's not the pitch process, the actual production process. There's one thing that is very different between writing and illustrating as far as the whole process goes. So for writing, writers are given, hey, write this, or they'll pitch, hey, I will write this, and then they write it, and then they send it into the publishers. For illustrators, however, illustrators are told, hey, do this, and then I want to see 20 different versions of it between now and the end of it, right? Like you send in your early sketches, your color roughs, and all that.
It depends. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, go ahead.
But because I make a distinction between concept work and illustrations, and it's not the same thing. And I've had a lot of clients who confuse the two. And so, like, if I do an illustration, there's not going to be 20 different variations of it, just because the price point wouldn't. I mean, I would spend most of my time just doing all these different designs and stuff like that. And in the end, it doesn't, it's the point of the illustration is that final product. Whereas a concept, they're like, well, we don't know what this character looks like. And so that's what you're doing. You're figuring that out. So the end point isn't necessarily an illustration. And in video games, for example, the concept is more of it's a process, right? It's you do that, and then it goes over to somebody else. And I've had that also happen in tabletop gaming, where, for example, I'm creating almost like a style guide, and so the concept that I'm doing it's mostly internal, and it'll be handed off to another artist to do an illustration. But that's why I have to keep those two things very separate, because they are in my case, there's 2 separate price points and 2 separate jobs.
Fair
Yeah,
enough.
as Marcel said, that for Kobold Press, and I think for most RPG companies, I would assume, what we're looking for are illustrations, not concept work. So kind of the general process is, as I mentioned earlier, we'll send the artist a number of briefs. Here's the art we need. Then they'll send back sketches. Often it's just one sketch. Some artists might want to give 2 or 3, will sometimes 2 or 3 variations on the sketch, and then we'll work through that. Could be as simple as, yeah, that's perfect, or yeah, that's cool, but let's change this, this, and this. And then once the sketch is approved, then they move on, and then traditionally there's some sort of like a color rough where they work on that sketch, add colors. It's not going to be fully rendered, but it's just, okay, here, again, with that wizard example, the robes are red. I'm going to do this here. There's going to be kind of a blue thing here. And then, again, we'll work through it. Yeah, I like that, but you know what? We do a lot of red wizards. Let's do blue, that kind of thing. And then once that's approved, then they move on to the final. And then hopefully it's approved, and then we're good to go.
Awesome. Yeah, let's see. So, Mark, as the art director, are there things people should avoid when reaching out to publishers? Like, what do you not want to see?
Oh, boy. Well, I have 3 kind of, I almost call them golden rules. So it's like the opposite of that. Be professional. So if I get an initial contact and it's clearly unprofessional, I can very clearly tell that this person isn't very serious, or that can scare me. That, as far as not to do, that's really, I think, the main thing. Other than that, and I guess maybe goes along with being professional, is you don't need to wow me with your incredibly clever, witty banter. And I've gotten briefs where it was 4 paragraphs. I'm sorry, not briefs. An initial intro email, 4 paragraphs, and hey, I'm the most awesome ever, and here's why you desperately want to work with me. I've literally gotten those kinds of emails. It's like, are you kidding me? That's your initial communication with me. So yeah, just be succinct, be clear, be professional. As Marcel said, just send 2 or 3 of your pieces that you think are awesome and fit what we're looking for. And then if I like what I read and see, I'm going to go to your website. I'm going to study it, and I'm going to peruse it at length. But if that initial communication to me doesn't wow me, I'm going to move on to the 8,000 other emails I have to get through in a day.
All right. And so what are, this I guess for writing and illustrating, what are some common tools that you guys use? So what are your very most helpful things that help you with either writing or illustrating or cartography? Mm-hmm. James, you want to start?
Yeah, so for me, obviously, word processor. Microsoft Word is kind of the standard that everybody uses, because you can put styles in there, and then it makes it easier on your layout people if you adhere to the templated styles that people use. Right, Mark? Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah.
Okay. So that's.
Yeah, we really haven't even touched on the layout end of it, but yeah, that's a whole different world.
And so that's obviously having Microsoft Word or something that you can use to process words is a no-brainer kind of. I also, for me, I love to have lots and lots of digital tools and reference available. On the panel before this one, I talked about how I use Roll20 when I'm building monsters, and I use Roll20 and sometimes D&D Beyond when I am designing, because it's a way to quick reference stuff using their compendium in Roll20 and saying like, okay, how is it that it is that like a skill check or an ability check in D&D is typically written? What does the format look like? Oh my gosh, I can look at hundreds of them without ever having to turn a page. I can copy and paste monster abilities right into documents and then doctor them from there, if I need to do things like that. So I do think it's worth the investment for stuff like that. Obviously, I've worked with both of those companies. This isn't like me shilling for them or anything. I do use them actually all the time. So those are the big tools that I use. And then when I have to draw a rough map, so I do a lot of adventure design, and I often have to draw rough maps. I am not an artist, and so I like to give artists something that they can reference pretty easily, and there's a couple of good tools for that. I draw in Roll20 and will screenshot stuff because they have a grid, and I can snap lines to grids and do things like that, and pull in shapes, and then I can even pull in like tokens and stuff and say like, hey, yeah, there's going to be, a fire here in this fireplace, but don't make it look like this fireplace or whatever. And sort of pull things in that way. Or I also use Pyromancer's Dungeon Painter, which is a in-browser tool that you can use to build dungeons and even overland maps if you need a rough map to pass off to somebody who's going to make it look much, much better. So those are the tools I use.
Marcel, what tools do you use?
I use Photoshop mainly. I do use 3D Studio Max for complex backgrounds and stuff like that. And oftentimes, if I don't want to, because I only have the version of Max that I have is on one computer. I can't have it on the other one because I don't have the key. So if I don't want to turn that computer on, I'll often use Super Sculpey and just sculpt out a creature or something in there and be like posing it, and that's what I use for reference. But that's pretty much it. When it comes to drawings, it's mostly just straight into Photoshop.
Awesome. And then Anna, what tools do you use?
Yeah, Photoshop is a mainstay for me too. Texture work and a whole bunch of stuff like that, touch-ups and stuff. So Photoshop is one of but I start with 3D tools. So I use like World Machine, now a new tool called Gaia that is simply blowing everything out of water when it comes to terrain building. But I also use View. It's a 3D creating program that use Hollywood and TV studios and stuff use for creating reference 3D terrain. And then I use Illustrator. That's my other big thing for labeling and fonts and stuff like that in there, things like roads and stuff. But I also use geographical information tools like QGIS and ArcGIS and stuff too. So projections and stuff. So it's a whole range of them. And I use some texture tools and stuff like that too. And some InDesign and stuff too, because sometimes Mark and others sends me all the frills and because sometimes it needs to fit into the general design of a book or something like that. So you are design elements that you have to work on. So some of it it touches on a whole bunch of stuff and it needs to do the fonts and stuff needs to match what it's in the book and stuff. So it's a lot of back and forth that way too.
Yeah, and on the graphic design end, I use Adobe InDesign to do all the layouts. We use Illustrator for creating logos and a lot of times for type treatments, cover type treatments, things like that. And then I use Photoshop all the time as well. I do everything, color corrections. I mean, sometimes a piece of art might come in that's perfect, but late in the game, text gets changed and, oh, crap, now it says that he's wearing a red robe after all that, and we made it blue. Once I was going back to the artist, I can go into Photoshop and I'll change it that way, or I'll remove a magic item because something changed and I'll have to put a new thing in. So I do a lot of Photoshop work as well. But yeah, for me it's the Adobe suite, Illustrator, Photoshop, and InDesign. That's what I live in.
And that's one of the comments I want to make. Make sure early that you ask about the technical things. What is the layering they want, especially for maps, is really important. What kind of the end result? Do they want the labels on a separate layer? Is they want TIFF? What's the resolution? What's the maximum file size? What's the color space you're working in? And learn all these things. So when they ask and say that we want this to be RGB or CMYK, so and so with layers like that, you need to understand what these terms mean. You can't go and ask the one you're working for all the basics, so to speak. If you don't know what RGB and CMYK is and how that affects, then you need to learn that. And there's plenty of places on the internet where you can learn all this. So you need to that's all the basics like that and know what to ask for. So yeah.
Great point.
Awesome.
Yeah.
All right. Well, yes, these are all excellent tools, but it does look like our time is up. Unfortunately, I would like to shout out Thank you to GaryCon for hosting a virtual GaryCon so we can still all meet and have fun and do all of this cool stuff.
Yeah.
And thank all of you panelists. You guys have been great. Give yourselves a round of applause. You're wonderful.
Thank you.
I don't know if we're allowed to clap here, but here, it's virtual applause. There we go.
Yeah, looking forward to hopefully seeing everybody in person next year at GaryCon.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes.
Yep.
Awesome. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Megan, and thank you, Joey. Hidden.
Thank you.
And
In his purple bunker.
Yeah.
That's right.